Hello, everyone. So excited to our panelists. Hello. To everyone watching, thank you for being here. And this is the fifth panel in a series of panels that we are doing this weekend for NYC Gamer High School Festival. Um, so excited to have you all here. We are talking about Kink today. Name of the panel: A Kink Between Worlds, where we are discussing STEM and kink and what it means to be a player. Um, Talking about game things that um, come along with that, and so I'm super excited to have you all here. I would love if we could go around and introduce ourselves. I will start. I am Robert. I use he and him pronouns. Papa Bear. Anything. Any pronoun is really anything really, as long as you say it with respect, even if it's bitch. Totally fine with that. But if y'all could introduce yourselves, your name, your pronouns, and so excited.
So my name is Sharon Biswas. I am a game designer, artist, and writer in New York. I also teach at Fordham and NYU Game Center, and I use he pronouns.
What about
What do Bob? I use she, variety analyst, activist, and
thank you?
Hello, I am Liquid. My pronouns are she, they, them, that bitch. I am a social work, mental health professional, pro dom, sex work, and a kinkster for the past 25 years.
Amazing. And last but not least, Ben.
Hello. Right next to them. I'm Ben. I use he, him pronouns. I'm fairly new to kink and that part of my life, but I have been gaming since the beginning of time. So, you know about that.
I just want to say I want to give Liquid my shirt because it just says
That
"Yeah,
bitch.
bitch." I was
I actually have a belt. She, they, them, that bitch.
need that in my life.
I'm just gonna start here, but if you do not follow Liquid on Instagram, you are missing out. That is all I
On
will
the
say.
debauchery.
Oh my god. Every time something will pop up and I am just that bitch. In like for that's why that's her name. That's why. I see it. But uh oh my god, I'm so excited. Okay. So why don't we totally dive in? And I think Ben sort of even started the conversation in a way. And I think, you know, I'm going to frame it from the perspective. So I mentioned this in the beginning. I talked about being a player. I think that, oftentimes we may not think of ourselves as one or the other, a gamer, a kinkster. Um, I think that when we learn language and when we share language with one another and share experiences with one another, then that may validate the experiences that we have or the relationship we have to something. And so sometimes it is just about learning language and reframing things in order to understand where our place in something. And often we're not allowed to think that we're allowed to have a space a place in that space, right? So part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with y'all. But when or how did your journey as a player start? Whether it's gaming and or kink and or the merging of those two things, if it's happened. Um, Shrine, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. So I, like many of us, started gaming when I was very young. I started running and creating role-playing games on the bus home in the third grade when I would like run role-playing games for like people. And it's actually interesting because only a few years ago did I realize that that age is where my interest in kink probably also started because I have distinct memories of watching the Adam West 60s Batman TV show. and how at the end of every episode, Batman and Robin were always like tied up to some infernal machine, and then the villain was like, "And now I will do all these things to you." I remember being like, "Oh yeah, wow, that's really cool." And I remember this is very distinct. I remember thinking, "What would I do if I had Robin and Batman tied up?" Ooh, interesting. But I was like 7, so it was just like I had no vocabulary or thought about that specifically. I was just like, "That sounds really cool." So we talk about like like this idea of queerness coming from a young age, and I can personal experience shows me that yes, for me, queerness started at a very young age, along with gaming. Yay.
I
Um,
can definitely.
go ahead,
Oh,
please.
I
Sorry.
definitely.
I
I could definitely add on to that, and completely agree that I have distinct memories of being in like elementary school, and I knew I was gay as hell, and I had my favorite game, to no one's surprise, was like Cops and Robbers or something where I had a position of authority over other children. I don't know what was going on, but that was it for me. I was like, "No, you broke the rules. Go back to the cage wherever I put you." And I'm not gonna forget this. And that was, exciting for me. And of course, I played games. I'm a gamer. I stream. I do all these things. Games has always been a part of my existence on this planet. But the first games before video games came into my life were punishing other kids and people for some strange reason. But yeah.
so much of this is resonating for me. Liquid, how about yourself?
I'm trying to think back because I'm pretty sure I'm probably like the oldest one in this conversation here. So the games that I played, the games that I played were like 2D, so there wasn't as cool as anything there. Like you couldn't find anything on Mario Brothers or like Nintendo and Atari that was anything kinky. But in terms of role playing, I again at a very young age always being dominant and being the bossy ones, around, my friends and my families, and I had to always be that authoritative person, as well as, for some reason, I like getting in trouble. I was the one that you told not to do something, and I would go ahead and do it religiously every single time that I was told not to do. It was always pushback. So coming up in kink, being dominant just came naturally to me, So especially being a pro dom and having clients and stuff, that has always evolved because I'm constantly playing a different role depending on clientele and depending on the people that I am around and in the scene. So, role play and all of those things have always been a part of my kinkiness and a part of my life. They all intersect.
Thank you. Again, all of this is so resonant for me. And Ben, how about yourself?
This conversation is unlocking so many memories. like from like TV shows, movies, and video games where characters would get tied up, and I was like, "Ha, this is awakening something. I don't know what it is, but it is awakening something." I didn't figure out what that was until recently, but um, there was no surprise that whenever in a video game I was able to customize my character, I usually wore the most like it was basically fetish gear. Like I remember being a teen and playing Saints Row the Third, and it was super edgy at the time because it's like, oh my god, they say swear words. But there is literally a store in Saints Row the Third that is a fetish gear store, and you can wear all sorts of stuff. And I fully decked out my character, and at the time, just thought that was sexy and didn't think anything more deeper about it. But here I am.
I mean, I have absolutely in certain role-playing video games worn the fetishy-looking armor just because it looks better, even if it's objectively worse than some of the other armor. Like I'm playing Dragon Age 3, I just started recently, and there's this like rope and leather thing you can put on early game if you bought the special edition, and I'm like, I'm never gonna put on any other armor. Like, why would I want to? So,
I love that. Um, so I'm hearing all of this, like we can think back to when it all started and how it started, but I'm curious because I think about my own journey and like I Batman definitely resonated for me because I think that that was my first crush when I was like, yep, this is definitely who I'm into. I don't know why. I definitely understood the relationship between Batman and Robin and that there was like this thing going on that was very like subverted, but I wanted to do bad things to Batman. I didn't know I did just that's how it started and I was 11. But I'm wondering, I'm curious because I want to dig in a little bit to the when did you I want to say arrive and be like, yeah, this is me, but not really that way because I don't think it's a single moment. Well, maybe it could be a single moment. Um, that you went from like these are the things that sort of happened, and then there was a moment where you could claim it as yours. Like, what was where was when was it that you felt like you could sort of take it and own it and make it yours in whatever way?
I'm actually curious about Liquid's answer to that because you also do this professionally, right? So there's a merging of professional, personal, leisure, not leisure. And I'm really curious how all those come together with your work.
So the one thing about me, and it's one of the things that I love about just my name that I have in kink, which is liquid because it's fluid and I am able to flow into any environment, you know. So I was always changing, that chameleon, you know. I could always be a different person at any given time. And when it came into kink, that I got into pro dom, it was in the mid 90s. It was in 95. And I went to an old sex club back in the day, which was the Vault, down on 14th Street. And the first time me entering that space, you know, and my way of getting in, because unlike the bars that are out here in New York City now, you know, things back then were very much taboo and very much underground. So you literally had to know someone to get into those spaces. And I came into those spaces with gay men because I was the token femme. So I didn't appear as a threat to anyone. And it was going to the Vault for the first time and just seeing so many things that I couldn't put a name on before that. And then it evolving. So seeing men being dominated in these spaces and you know the pro doms, just seeing club goers, just seeing people being free about their sexuality. And it was every bit of that that I wanted and didn't have a name for. And it was from that moment on that it continued for me and I kept going back. And the more events that I went to, whether it was the Vault or it was Hellfire or anything over the years, the people that I gravitated towards were the people that had the same interests like me. But at the same time, I kind of changed and made my own along the way because I didn't want to be this box of what kink is supposed to look like. And there weren't many open people of color in kink back then, you know, especially for me. There were a very small amount of, you know, women, femme presenting folks in kink that were black or brown. So I just like found the way to just navigate through those spaces. And I enjoyed every minute of it because you never knew with me who you were going to get every time. And it was always me, but just in a different form, in a different casing, so to speak.
I had a very, I would say, a very diff because I entered the world more recently. So back when I was an undergrad, so that was like 2008 to 12, right? And I was fortunate to enter the world when there are a lot of resources for people who are interested. So I'm a professor. I'm ridiculously nerdy. So I got into kink by taking a class and going to conferences talking about kink. Like I literally like one of the co-ed fraternities at my college organized a bondage workshop when I was a freshman, and I went to that, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And then I'm like, oh, I remember my Batman and Robin interest. And then because I talk about this a lot, like the difference between hyper elite wealthy schools and less elite schools is essentially the amount of money that's available. So I was lucky because I went to a hyper elite school where there was a lot of money for students to use, which meant the queer organization could send us to a lot of like conferences. So I went to a lot of like regional conventions in like Vermont and in like Massachusetts and all these, and I learned a little bit about like, oh, kink and different ideas of queerness. And that is what started to inform me about what I'm interested in. But of course, like I like to underscore this for everyone, not our panelists as only, but like for viewers, I mean, in that identity is fluid, like Liquid said, and throughout your course of your life, things change. For example, last year I was like, maybe I should consider becoming more of a switch. I'm alone at home for a year. Perfect time to think about myself and like consider new things, right? So still always redefining and thinking about myself. I used government money, the checks that we all got to buy myself sex toys, just to be like, let me see if I enjoy this.
Self care.
Exactly. So yeah.
I am right there with you where I spent my money. I have no shame in that. So I would say I am newer to the official idea of it, but I can go back to, like we talked about a little bit, going back to childhood, right? And I had a very non-traditional upbringing. So I had a single mother from Puerto Rico. She was a dominant figure in every single aspect of her life. And my mother is also a sex worker. So I had a very different upbringing when it comes to sex and what that means and what it means with men or what it means with women. And when you're younger, and some people are like gasp at this, but when you're younger and seeing like a man suck on your mom's toes, it sticks with you in your mind. How for lack of a better explanation, men should be doing that. So I take that sort of experience and all the experiences I had with my mother growing up and sort of how she taught me how to be a strong woman, a dominant figure in my own life, and her relationships with men, and the entirely different way her relationships with women went. And I feel I, like most people, hate the fact that I am a exact reflection of that. Very, very similar. um, Basically twins. Um, but until I want to say maybe 10 years, I had an experience with a very close friend, and that sort of awaken the official welcoming, where it's like, oh, there is a category for this, there's a word for this, there are classes for this, there are things that we can do to educate ourselves and be a bit more educated on the world of BDSM. So I'm still a little baby, but it definitely is something that I had my entire life, weirdly enough.
The great thing about like BDSM and kink, your journey in it is always going to evolve and it's always going to change over time. How we play, how we engage with partners, who our partners are, how many partners we have. That is also going to change because who I was 25 years ago is completely different from who I am now. Because back then I was a dominant, a top, and I would tell everyone I was a top leaning switch. That was, people would beg to differ on that, but because it was a way for me not to give up control, and much like gaming, when you're so like into it, you don't want to give up that control. You're not going to like hand your control over to someone else. But, it took a lot and a lot of growth and soul searching for me to even get to a point where when it comes to like rope bondage, that I decided to move towards bottoming for that. And that was my way of being vulnerable within kink and giving up control. That would be the only way for me to give control. So it's always going to evolve. That's your kink is never set in stone. And that's the beauty of BDSM, you know?
I
Mhm.
often talk about relationships. It is your relationship to kink will change within the relationships with the people that you're building those relationships in. I think that's super, super. Thank you for saying that.
Definitely.
Yeah. Ben, how about you?
Yeah, like I definitely relate to I definitely relate to it changing a lot. And I actually sort of recently kind of was surprised at myself for how I'd sort of come into all of this. Like I came from a fairly sex negative household, so I don't want to like use the word repressed, but maybe that's what it was. And I'm realizing now how much I was subconsciously exploring this part of my identity through the games I was playing and through the characters that I was creating in those games and how I wanted them to look or act. And it was only in, kind of early college that those things kind of started to bubble up to the surface. And I mean, it was only around like 2, 3 years ago when I met Robert that like once I was introduced to the fact to like other people who engaged in kink, I was like, oh, I do that. Like, and I guess I sort of have been surprising myself over the last couple of years with how much I want to do and how much I enjoy doing, because before that, I just assumed that I didn't because I was never really exposed to it.
We don't know what we don't know. That's one of my favorite sayings is, some people are like, I am straight. I know I'm straight. Like, listen, we as a human race are changing and challenging ideas, and the language is evolving and the ideas are evolving. And there's going to be things maybe 5 years from now that don't exist today. They're gonna be like, oh, I've always had that. There wasn't a word for it before. There was an idea for it. So I love that sort of coming like, oh, this makes sense. This clicks.
Yeah.
Achievement unlocked.
Gaming spaces are like ripe for exploration and subversive practices, right? This includes like when we talk about like MMOs or like Second Life and those kinds of places where people try on different identities. And a lot of my research and artistic work is in live action games, right? Live action games are particularly ripe for people to try on different identities, to try on different things to see if they fit. There's research about this that scholars have written about, but I personally know people who are like, I'm going to play this 3-day LARP and I'm going to play a different gender, and 1 month later they're like, I'm going through hormone therapy now because I'm changing my like gender and things like that, right? And similarly, like sexuality, and we talk about this as one of the I'm going to use the word function, but in a not a way like this is the purpose, right? But one of the functions of games is that you can, especially role playing games, is you can explore these different things, and this idea of bleed, which is a term popularized by Emily Care Boss, where like emotions in and out of game like merge together. Bleed can be very powerful in helping people explore new aspects, facets, things about themselves, which include gender stuff, sexuality stuff, and kink stuff, which are related but not necessarily the same, obviously. So
Yeah, I know actually quite a few Kinksters that are heavily involved with Second Life. I also know a great deal of sex workers who have created this whole Dom world in Sims where, they will like post like in their stories their dominant selves like kicking the ass of a client. And there's a whole poll and there's a whole setup and like there is like it's just like this whole entire world, and they do intersect a lot even at certain cons depending on which ones you go to. Like I see a lot of in the rope cons that they have like some of the parties and stuff outside from the classes in the workshop are a lot of gaming spaces for rope folk and kinksters who want to game during the events, which is cool. So they're always going to intertwine and intersect in some way or another because again it's the same thing. You are role playing in each side of it and you can and do so safely, so I think it's pretty cool.
Video games is one of the few tools in life that allow you to be something completely different and have full control over that. And I love that the term bleed because it happens all the time. And I love Sims because that is something that you don't have to have money. You can experience things and create the life you want in Sims and try out a new life without the limitations of money or access or things like that. Whereas maybe someone who isn't comfortable going to clubs or cons or whatever the case may be can have that piece of themselves in Sims or Second Life or any MMO, whatever the case may be. So that's the one thing I love of games is that it's accessible for a
Mhm.
lot of people to have that without maybe the limitations that real life has. So
Like
Yeah, and I
we
think
talk about. Sorry.
yeah. So I think what's so interesting about video games as well is that usually none of the developers intended for any of this to happen. They made a video game and they were like, here's what you can do, go play. And I think what's so beautiful about video games is that players can take the tools that the developers gave us and do whatever we want with those tools. Nobody made The Sims so that we can live out our dom sub fantasies, but we can because we have that power. And same thing for kind of any game that where you can dress in all sorts of fetish gear, where you can create a character. Like no one intended for this to happen, but the way that games work means that we have so much power in creating our own experience with what we're already given.
I mean, discussion, right, about like whenever humans create a new form of media, the first thing we share is porn, right? Like there's like ancient porn graffiti, or we make a new internet thing, and oh, now we share porn, right? And of course, the question currently that's in the zeitgeist, I'm sure Liquid, you are familiar with this a lot, is the idea of OnlyFans, and OnlyFans is now saying, oh, we want to stop some of the like sex worker stuff going on it because we want to become more legit, even though like sex workers and people who made OnlyFans popular, things like that. So there's a history of making new media, then sharing smut through it, and then once it becomes popular, people like actually we don't want to share smut anymore, and those who are doing so are now bad, right? Which is weird. But I also want to say like this idea of like there are so many. I was rereading this morning in preparation for the panel, right? So I was rereading this paper by Sif Bonin and Harvianian called "The Intersection of Games and BDSM Studies," right? And they note a bunch of research that talks about like how LARPing and live action role playing and tabletop role playing has borrowed so many techniques from the kink community, such as safe words, consent negotiation, all that kind of stuff. But they also note how so much of kink has similarities to role playing, whether intentionally or just because they grew out in the same way, about like embodying characters and playing roles and how do you behave that is different in game or in the headspace than out of game or out of the headspace, right? Uh, and there are a lot of similarities between these two. And the paper actually notes further research can be done because there isn't a lot of research about this, as one can imagine. It's hard to get grads to do research about BDSM. Um, but there's a lot of fertile ground where we can explore what is going on in kink, in role playing, how they can relate, how they can help us understand each other. It's like fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I was playing. I've just started a new D&D game with a bunch of my friends, and while we were creating our characters and while we were setting up the world, it was actually my straight friend who I had no idea would even know about any of this stuff. He was like, "All right, do we all want to talk about like our limits, our like hard limits for content that's going to happen in this campaign?" And so he was like, "Yeah, like I want to put like a hard limit on like intense sexual content, or like I don't want there to be any like sexual assault scenes. I don't want there to be any like and we had like a pretty lengthy discussion about the kinds of things that we are not comfortable seeing in our D&D game. And I was sitting there sort of being like, that's like, this is a kink discussion. Like this is what this is. And it's just kind of interesting how that um, things like that kind of can and should be in the rest of our everyday lives.
And you see how you said something that is really important is that this was brought up in gaming. And for those who game and are interested in kink, and may not have like the resources or able to attend events, they're getting some pieces or elements of kink education within gaming, and they might not necessarily know people in kink or want to reach out to anyone that is involved in kink out of fear of being kink shame or something like that. But the fact that these discussions are not just happening in the real world but happening in the gaming world is great, because it should happen. Discussions on consent and negotiations on scenes and stuff that you're building in these second worlds and in real life, are important, and that we should always be having. And the fact that, just something like that in your group is being discussed is so important, because oftentimes you end up playing with other gamers and stuff, and you find out that something is a little in the content that is a little too much for you. Like you said, as far as sexual assaults, that might be a trigger for someone. And if they don't know that going in, can cause trauma. So it's good to have those discussions, and it's great that that education is there even while gaming.
I'm loving all of this. I think, I am someone who, as part of NYC Gamers and like, and even just, I'm the former president and CEO of Folsom Street East. I work for a nonprofit that supports survivors of violence within the LGBTQ and HIV affected communities. Like, this is my life's work. And this is why this panel was such a near and dear thing to me, because I think that far too often what happens is we are told that something is not for us or that it isn't about us. And this is just general life advice. Like, the skills that we learn throughout our life are transferable, right? Having conversations and building relationships, understanding what consent means, negotiating. These are transferable skills that we can take wherever we go. And it's just music to my ears to hear you all talking about this in this way that is like even just the concept of play. Like, I immediately was thinking of play therapy. That, like, this is something that kids do, right? And like, again, these are transferable things that we are able to utilize, and we don't even know that we're doing it. And it just, like, I can't tell you how many kinky people I know who use kink as a method of calibrating their mental health, or just being able to let go. Like, I am someone who creates space for people to be able to understand that, like, you don't have to know everything. Let's sit down and have a conversation. I don't know everything, but we can do this together, right? So I'm loving this, loving this, loving this. I totally just lost my train of thought. The bus is derailed. The train's derailed. The bus is on the road. I don't know what's going on.
I
Oh my
mean,
goodness.
one
I had
thing
a
I
question.
wanted, well, while you're thinking, I want to respond to something you said, because this idea of kink. I mean, kink is a not a new human thing, right? A lot of people
Right?
sometimes think that, oh, what is this newfangled thing kids these days are doing, right? Like, their sexuality researchers have noted that in the ancient world, when contraception was harder to come by, a lot of people engaged in kink activities as a way to like be sexual, which is not to say that kink activities are always sexual, right? There's also a lot of discussion about like kink in a non-sexual way, or kink that fulfills other kinds of human desires and wants, be
Mhm.
they social or be they personal. But like kink activities, dominance, submission, power dynamic stuff is like really old and has existed since humans have interacted. And I hope that
Mhm.
gave you time to remember your next question.
I was
Yeah,
gonna,
no.
this isn't new. I was gonna say, like, this isn't new. We're just being louder about it nowadays.
Absolutely.
Not new.
Yeah, just like with queerness and stuff, right? Like we're being
Exactly.
louder about certain kinds of queerness and things. Yeah.
I mean,
And
it's
I
also like,
love that.
go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I love that. As I don't know if I'm the youngest, but I've drafted these tweets in my head a million times about how when I was younger and I was in Saga, which is Straight and Gay Alliance in school. That's
Hmm.
really the only resources we had. Um, I think about, and I talked about it briefly about how we change and words come into our life and we learn brand new experiences, and how if I knew the word, like if I knew the existence about being trans or non-binary or anything when I was younger, my life would have been very, very different. And the louder we are, I love that because all I can think about is little Eva in school not understanding maybe why she's not comfortable in her body or why she's not comfortable with the gender roles that she's been assigned. Um, and now I always talk about it. Now I'm too lazy with my sexuality and gender where I'm like, I'm just me, I'm existing. I don't care what physical form I'm in. But it's that it's so important to be loud. And we're not hurting anyone. We're respectful. Everyone who's very respectful about what they do, and being loud allows, the next generation to understand their own lived experiences without, me meeting some kids and explaining it to them. It's just seeing stuff on Twitter, seeing things on Instagram, whatever, it just clicks. And I definitely wish I would have had that when I was younger. Um, so I love this. I love the conversation.
Yeah, it's we're living in different times where people are more open about their kink, and you're gonna have people, especially boomers, stuck in their ways and wanting to remain ignorant about it. Today, something popped up on Instagram where a councilman, a candidate for a councilman, was recorded and his picture was taken in a pro dom section,
I saw that.
I
Yeah.
love his
and and,
response.
and the comments were just like were ridiculous. Some people was like, oh, anyone who is involved in BDSM kink has a mental illness because who wants to be humiliated? And I'm just like, where are you getting this information? Like they're severely trauma. So I'm like, so I responded to one of them. I said, please tell me, the social worker and the therapist, also the kink educator and practitioner, where my trauma is because you are misguided and misinformed and you're letting your religion blind you and keep you closed minded, and that's what it is for a lot of people. And it was between a bunch of Karens in the comment section and men, and it was men who you can tell just by reading their comments are just insecure about their own sexuality and often closeted because they don't have a way to explore and vocalize it. But I'm like, the king, so what? He's paying someone so he can have fun. That's on him. How does that affect the way he may, if he was ever getting to that point, lead office? You know, it
They're
doesn't affect
insulted
me
by his
from me
freedom.
doing my job. In fact, I think it makes me what I do makes me a better social worker because it's life experiences, that I can engage in practice and talk to clients about it. And even with my paid clients as a pro dom, the work that social work and mental health is therapeutic for them, so they're getting both. They should be paying me more. But that's the whole
Yeah,
thing.
yes,
Cut those
yes,
rates.
You got a double
yes.
section.
Because you know that your therapist hat is still on when you are working and
Yep,
you're dumb. Like they don't our identities don't disappear. They're
exactly.
there, right? And so yes, you are a better dom because you're a social worker. You're a better social worker because you're a dom. Like that,
Yes.
I 100% amplify that because it's true, and you should charge
And I would
because you're
dare to
worth it.
say that being a dom within itself is being hyper aware of the other person's needs, want, even if they're not aware of it. You have to be hyper aware of that. When they're pushing themselves too far, when like I don't think this is safe for you, I don't think this is right for you, whatever the case may be. So even if you weren't a social worker, that aspect is always going to be there of you needing to be the person that is aware of that, because sometimes, as a switch, sometimes I don't care. I don't think about my well-being. And I was like, just do it. Just do it. And it's like, okay, no. Like you have to think about your safety and your well-being and things like that. So even the role itself is very you know, assessing mental health and things like that.
Liquid was saying really brings up this idea that I firmly believe that age appropriate discussions of kink should be part of sex education. I
Mhm.
think, again, age appropriate, and that is for someone else to decide that who has expertise in that. But I think, like, kink is an important expression of human sexuality, and it should be part of our education to tell people this is a thing that happens. This is not something you should be freaked out about. That would, I hope, prevent things like what Liquid was saying, where people are like, "Oh my God, someone does kink, they are unfit to be mayor." Like, what does that have to do with anything, right? So I think just like we've been talking about, like, there's pushback against how queerness should be part of children's sex education. Like, this should be a thing. Like, this is an important aspect of humanity that we should show. Similarly, I think at an, again, age appropriate way, we should have in sex education, what is kink, what does it mean, why you don't have to be frightened of it, why you shouldn't hate someone just because they engage in it, those kind of things. I firmly believe that that's important.
And also, I mean, for one thing, kids and young people are incredibly intelligent. They are incredibly intuitive as well. So many people underestimate the intuitiveness of young people. And in my opinion, what's worse than a child or like a teenager knowing something that people might consider inappropriate for their age, it's worse to not know something. If you see something that you don't understand and you are deliberately not given an explanation for it, that will only serve to make it worse. And I'm sure we can all relate to something like that happening in our lives, where we were not given an explanation to something, and then it's just scary, and then it's just, uh-oh, better avoid that, because the adults in my life and the older people in my life don't want to tell me what it is. So it must be problematic.
It all comes back to safety, right? And this is like a topic of sex education as a whole. How are you supposed to move through life having safe sex, healthy sexual relationships with people when you don't know what that means? When you don't know what is safe, what is not the right way, but a way to make sure that you and your partner, whoever that is safe. Um, it's very important that those educational resources are out there, and I wish more people talked about that or allowed that conversation to happen about kink and queerness with children, because all of us already said it. We were very aware of something when we were younger. We didn't may have not had the words for it, but we were aware of something, and it ended up coming up later in our lives. But, I just think of, and it's not really a kink thing, but I just think of, like, there was a year when kids were, um, doing, like, the asphyxiation challenge.
Mhm.
That's the first thing that comes to mind, is there was no education about that, on why maybe they're doing it as often, or why, they did it once for, like, haha, giggles, and why did they continue to do it by themselves? Um those conversations need to happen, because that's how we save lives, realistically, and be it through sex education, identity education, whatever the case may be, it just needs to happen.
I absolutely agree with you on that. And as the parent and grandparent in this panel, my youngest is about to be 17, but I always had the firm belief that I wanted my kids to learn from me. I didn't want them to find out anything on the street that would put them in unsafe conditions, because, again, like Ben said, like everything's on television. Kids know. Even when you think they don't know, kids know. So having these conversations, especially about sexuality and sexual identity, even reproductive health and things like that. And you go into high school now, they're not teaching you any of that. You're like, okay, this is the woman's reproductive system, this is the man's reproductive system. Here's some condoms, and that's it. Because even in high school, especially high schools in New York, they're giving out birth control, they're giving out the depot shots, they're giving out condoms, they're giving out all of those things, but you're not telling them anything else beyond that. It's like, here's a list of STIs, here's this, here's that, but there's no deeper discussion about it. They're not telling you, what a toxic relationship, because you'd be surprised how many teenagers in high school are in like domestic violence relationship and like same-sex intimate partner violent relationships, and no one has had that conversation, and they think that this is a healthy relationship. My kids, like I said, I don't go into depth about what I do, but they are well aware of, that mom is a leather person. They see my sash from my title. I have a room specifically that is half kink stuff, half mermaid stuff. They're more confused by the fact that mom is a mermaid than by the fact that mom is a kinkster. You know, the mermaid part disturbs them more than the kinky part.
I
But
love
having
both.
these conversations with them so that they are safe and they know what a healthy relationship looks like and healthy engagements look like with other people. Because when you send kids out there to explore on their own, you're setting them up for failure and you're setting them up for something that can potentially be harmful. And then they're looking at you like, well, no one ever told me this. You know, why didn't you tell me this? So it's good to have these conversations. And if you are not comfortable having a conversation with your child about it, then maybe you have a friend that is, you know, or someone within your community that is okay having a conversation, whether it be about sex or sexuality or kink or things like that. Again, you don't have to always go into graphic detail, but have someone that is comfortable. They even have workshops. Half of these toy stores, you know, have workshops that are free that you can go to. And, you know, the center has a bunch of how to talk to your children about sex, your teen. Do it. But, you know.
Scarletine. I always recommend Scarletine to people, right? I think one of the things that also is because like Liquid touched on this idea of like how graphic or something, right? And I feel a lot of people are like, yeah, we should educate kids, but the education is going to be this, and we're not going to actually tell them anything beyond like use condoms and have consent. And I'm like, great, if I am a teen and I'm probably going to be engaging in sex with someone, I will need information about beyond, like, I will need a certain level of how to, right? That's not just like use condom. Like, what do I do with a condom? Do I put it on my nose? So like I think we are afraid sometimes of like talking to young people about what sexuality is apart from safety and consent, which I think of course we need to talk about safety and consent, but at some level teens who are going to engage in sexual activity need a good level of accurate information about what sexual activity means, because otherwise they're going to default to porn, and everyone knows that porn is entertainment and fantasy, and very rarely is it a how-to, right? If it is a how-to, it is a specific, this is instructional porn, right? So I think we do kids a disservice by not having actual frank discussions about what it means to be sexual with someone, which could include which may or may not include like kink stuff. And I think we need to think more as a society about what sex education that talks about the value of human sexuality and not just the precautions and dangers of human sexuality, right? We talk about there's in some of the literature I was reading today, we talk about how like at some level games and kink you can think of in some ways because both of these can be construed as activities that humans engage in to enjoy each other's presences and to enjoy each other's like this, right? To enjoy other humans, right? And sometimes I feel that for young people we forget the enjoyment part, which means that like people talk about like, oh, the first time you have sex is always going to be painful. Not true, but we have this myth because we teach this to kids and we don't talk about like how to engage in sexual activity in a positive way that will bring you enjoyment. And I think that's something we need to examine in society.
It's
And I was saying,
often painful because we're not prepared.
We're
oh
not
If
yeah,
doing
you
it
prepare
properly. Yeah,
and you're educated, then you're not hurting yourself or someone else. Go ahead.
yeah,
Mhm.
well, it's generations of the sex education being based off abstinence and fear. That's
Yep.
it. I'm gonna show you this scary picture of bumps on a penis, and you're not gonna want to have sex, and that is gonna save you from hell. That is what sex education has been for so many people. And I think especially in the kink community, I can count on not no, actually like all my fingers and toes and hands, every how many times we've seen manipulation tactics. Same thing happens in cis sex relationships. How do we talk about consent, but what is consent under manipulation? And that's not something that's taught. That's a safety. That's just as much important as wearing a condom, is understanding when you've said yes, but you've said yes under duress or under, tactics that maybe that older guy did. And it's one of those things that I wish I have known, because I can speak from my experiences. The first sexual encounter I had with the guy, was a guy that I was dating, um, when I was 14, and he was having sex with other girls, and he was, wanting to have sex with his friends in the room, and I didn't see a problem with that because no one told me different. And as a Latinx female, it's the sort of idea of ingrained in me is like, you have to make your man happy. If that is the man you love, you're gonna make him happy, and you're gonna be submissive and do anything you need to do for them. So it's this idea of like, once again, thinking of future generations. I wish that conversation happened, because how much trauma could we erase from the world by spending 10 minutes with someone that's younger we love or care for, and just discussing what that looks like.
But if
And
you even think about, like, all of us sitting on this panel right now, if you think about in ways that, our parents have violated our consent. And what I mean by that is, and it's one thing that I have because my children are all girls, um, is being forced to hug someone, in the family that you weren't necessarily comfortable with, or, you're sitting in your dress or something and sitting on your uncle's lap, and they're touching you, and all of those things, when you didn't want to, and oh, go ahead and give them a hug and a kiss and things like that, and telling us that we needed to do those things. Like, can we normalize like children having consent at very young ages? And if they don't feel comfortable giving someone a hug, maybe you should look at why and allow them to have that space, that they don't have to. If they say no, but there shouldn't be
life.
a here, you force someone to give a hug, and it opens up for other toxic relationships later on in life with them. It's why a lot of them are misguided, even in terms of like FetLife. I hate FetLife. FetLife is a cesspool, in my opinion. You have people that never had a real conversation about kink, and they only see kink in porn and stuff like that. And they're 18 years old, they're just coming into kink, or they're curious about it. But 18 and everybody's a master, everybody's a dom, everybody's a submissive, everybody's a slave, everybody's this, that, and have no education and no resources. And then they end up falling prey to an abuser or a predator. And it happens more often than not, because as adults, no one's having these conversations. And it's pretty much the same, with gaming, we're not having these conversations, and we're not preparing these children for what is to come. And we need to do better as a community, as adults, period.
We devalue
And
their no from early
Hmm.
childhood immediately, and then scream at them when why didn't you say no? Well,
Exactly.
you told me not to say no. My no meant nothing. So
yeah, and video games were where I went to escape
Hmm.
from my boundaries and my consent being violated in my day-to-day life. Video games were where I went, where I got to make the decisions and I got to set my boundaries and I got to exercise control over what was happening. Because, yeah, in my real life, I didn't have any boundaries. But in video games, the boundaries were anything that I wanted.
I was having a conversation with some service providers who were doing a focus group on Friday in the midst of getting ready for all of this, and I was talking about consent, and it was refreshing to hear someone push back a little bit and say, yes, consent is extremely important, but we're not talking enough about dissent and teaching people to say no, because we have to, like, we talk about, everyone knows that no is a horrible safe word, right? When we're talking about kink, right? Absolutely true, it is. It's saying no before you get to the point of having to use something to say something stopping. Like, there has to be space for us to set boundaries and to And we're not taught that. You're not taught about healthy boundaries. And Liquid said it so well. And so I just want to highlight, uplift that, shout it from the rooftops that like we have to get better about like I was laughing because we don't have really good sexual health education. We don't have sexual health education. We have reproductive health
Mm-hmm.
education, but we don't have sex ed in the way that we should.
We have base mechanics.
Yep.
This is how it works, maybe.
This
And
is
like,
what goes where. Not we never ever talk about how to actually have a relationship. It's literally just this is how it functionally works. Don't get an STD. Bye.
and like when Lucian Khan and I applied for the grant to make Honey and Hot Wax, right? Which is I'm running one of those games for this festival very soon. So Honey and Hot Wax is an anthology of analog role playing games about sex, right? And we applied for grants from the effing foundation for it, and we said in our grant statement, we're doing this because we want there to be more art in the world that explicitly discusses sexuality from diverse perspectives, not about consent, not just about dissent, not just about pleasure, not just about the, not just we want there to be a we think that by having more art in the world that talks about sexuality in accessible ways, that these discussions will spread and that we'll be able to improve education, like even if no one of the ideas, so Naomi Clark wrote the introduction to our book, right, and she talked about this idea that even if you don't play any of these games, right, even if you don't want to ever play a role-playing game about sex, which is completely valid and your choice, she says even reading it is helpful because it makes you think about sexuality. And that was one of our goals, right? That's why we got these grants for this, right? Even if the majority of people who look at this book do never play any of these games, just the fact that it exists and that you glanced at it is hopefully making people think about like sexuality and play and how we don't have to be frightened of sexuality, that we can talk about it openly, and that will, ultimately spread. And, this is a very lofty goal, but like, yes, the power of art to change people's lives. But that's
And
literally why we made that book, right? So
and I love that because I think that is really the way that I think about this too, and the purpose of having this conversation, because you are all leaders in your worlds, and these are things that you do every day, and and just showing people that we're able to do these things, to have these conversations. Like I talk all the time, we need more role models, right? And then pick the right role models too, right? You have to be able to evaluate and make sure that you're getting information that's right, and those sorts of
And
things.
not traumatic, because a
Yeah,
lot of stuff that's out there can be traumatic. I'm thinking about listening to all this. Back in the early 90s, MTV had did the movie Kids,
oh my god.
and that was traumatic as hell.
Woo.
can
That
you
was,
can you summarize what the movie is a bit, Liquid?
oh God.
Oh,
Because remember, I grew up in the Middle East, so I did
It's
not
if
know what
you
that
go out,
was.
you can Google it and find it. It's out there. It's something
it
that you need to
is.
see, and it is about very young teenagers and
So
unprotected
have
sex.
you heard of the show Generations on HBO, right?
I love the show Generation on HBO.
Okay, so Kids is basically a movie version of Generations that was basically trauma porn.
Mm.
It literally is just like kids living in New York City and their experiences from the perspective of that they have no regard for their own safety whatsoever.
Mm.
It's a really hard movie to watch.
Mm.
Um, and it's traumatic as all hell. And kids were
It
watching it.
it really is, and it was like part of like somewhat of a scare tactic of telling kids like if you have sex, this is what's going to happen
Yeah.
to you. If you aren't doing it, it was a really fucked up like movie. Excuse my language. And even like I said, now many 20 something years later, 30 years later, like I can still see that movie clear as day, and some of the scenes that I never want to see
Yeah.
again. But it's like those things. We can have these conversations with not just kids too. We're sitting here talking about kids with other adults without having to traumatize them or use a scare tactic to explain that sex and kink can all be enjoyable and it is enjoyable if done right and done safely and done consensually, and all of those things. But yeah, everything doesn't have to be like a scare tactic or, unless that's your kink. But, unless you like getting kidnapped and that's your kink. Yeah. But no, we can do it in, constructive ways and, amplify, voices and uplift people to say that, what, there is nothing wrong with you enjoying this kind of sex or enjoying this type of play, because for a lot of people, kink is very therapeutic for them.
Yeah. And there's so many things. Like we could have this conversation for like 8 hours for 4 days and still not cover all of the topics as deeply as they need to be. But I think, just sort of the thing that I keep going back to and thinking about because um there is education and then there's taking the things that you learn and applying them to real world situations and sort of how do you get from that theory to practice, right? Like I was laughing at your FetLife comments, Liquid, because it was just like, yes, like you can read all you want and you can watch all the porn you want, but then when you're in a real situation, it's going to be a little bit different. And so
Yeah.
also just creating space for those folks who are watching that may not have the experience and want to have the experience. You have to be flexible within your limitations, right? You
Hmm.
have to be flexible. You can't go in with hard expectations and just be like, this is the way it's going to go because this is the way it's supposed to go. And you have to be flexible and create space for some of the messiness, right? So long as that you're safe and that you're able to check in and talk about things afterwards. But flexibility is so, so important. Um, I want to be mindful. We have plenty of time. We still have a half hour. We're good. Um, I want to ask this question. So I did not write all these questions. They were written with Rafi, the president of NYC Gamers. And I love Rafi's brain. And so this question to me was just super, super fun. And I want to ask it because I want to see what y'all would say. So imagine your dream game room in person. You have a home, you have a game room. It's completely open to your interpretation. What thing or things in your game room are you also taking into your dungeon? Because you've got that too. And so maybe this room serves both purposes. What is in your dream game room that you can take into your kink space or play?
I love this question because in this dream world, I'm rich that I have both a playroom and a dungeon. I'm like, oh yes, love that for me. Um, this is a tough one.
I mean, I literally just talked about a book which uses sex mechanics and kink in games. So, like, a lot of the equipment is dual purpose there. That's my easy answer, but I'll think about the actual answer.
I can say I had a lot of time to think about this because I was in the room when the question came up, but I will say that my answer was real quick. Because I'm somebody who I've always wanted a pool table. Um, I I'm not really good at pool, but if I had a pool table, I would play all the time and get really good because it's probably only like in a space sort of like sporting game that I like that and bowling. And a bowling alley, like I'd have to be really rich to have a bowling alley in my house. Um, but
We're not Jeff Bezos here. We're
right.
mid-level rich.
But I
Okay.
immediately went to a pool table and then immediately went to I'm tying someone to the pool table, right? Like it's covered in a play sheet. I'm tying someone to the pool table. Pool balls might be going places. Like I went real quick. I didn't even have to think about it.
I mean, I've toyed with the idea. It's in my, as a game designer, as an artist, I have a giant folder of ideas that I've never followed through with, right? But I've toyed with the idea of a horror role-playing game in which you as a player slowly become more and more tied up physically as the game progresses. Um, yeah, so that's one of the ideas I have. Like as you play and the horror, you're exploring whatever haunted house or whatever, you start becoming physically immobilized. So you as a human have a lot less agency as your character is losing their agency as well. That's something that I'm interested in. I was once commissioned for a sex party in Brooklyn right before COVID, so it never actually happened because COVID happened. To design a specifically D&D table where like part of the game would be like, oh, you rolled, I don't know, a natural one. Now you have to do this sex act. Well, by have to, you know what I mean. So I was experimenting with that. So there are a number of ways like sexuality and play can come into play, right? That's part of what I do as research and artistic practice. So yeah, so I haven't given you a proper answer, but yeah.
Um, this is a tough question for me. I'm gonna give a very like a PC gamer answer here, where like there wouldn't be a separation of rooms for me. And this is like the joke with like the edgy PC gamers. It was like under desk support. Um, and like I love this chair. There's holes. There wouldn't be a separation of the rooms for me. Just because that's just I love that. I love that idea of just like my whole house is mine. So that's,
Mhm.
I can use it however I please.
That's right.
Huh. I was thinking something similar in terms of no separation of rooms, but being like, because I'm all about like a mystery, and being very inconspicuous, have that the game room feel of like more loungy, and have like a floor to ceiling screen but projector that goes up with remote control, and the wall behind it opens up into like my dungeon area with my St. Andrew's cross and everything, like very like that. So it looks like a chill space, but once the projector goes up, you're fucked. Literally.
Literally. I love it.
Like taking notes for future house.
I'm so
I
writing
love that
that
idea.
down.
Yeah. Hey, let me move this green screen. Here you
Mhm.
go.
Ben.
I don't know. I mean, I don't have money, so I'm not gonna have two rooms. Also, very likely would only have one room. But I would. I mean, I would love the kind of the sort of not like super strong boundary between different kinds of rooms. I've always thought it would be kind of entertaining to have something like be done to you whilst attempting to play a difficult video game and be successfve I've always thought
There
that
is
would be kind of
definitely
fun.
porn about that I have seen.
Yes. Yes,
So
there
yeah.
is. There's lots of it.
True gamer vibes. I beat the highest level or whatever and finished by the end of it. It was great.
Achievement unlocked.
Like play
Um,
Super Meat Boy while being tied up and stuff. Yep. That would be
you
interesting.
only have one hand. What do you do?
I mean, but that interestingly becomes an area that's ripe for experimental art, right? Like, let us design a video game that you play while things are being done to you. Like, that's the purpose of this video game, right? Or part of the book is like, can you are you gonna Janaea Kemper's game in the book is all about masturbating other players. It's a two-player game. One of you is Dracula, one of you is Lucy. It can be any gender Dracula, any gender Lucy, and you are slowly masturbating each other, right? And the text of the game says, oh, and if you find that you've stopped playing the game because you're too busy doing other things, that's fine too. The game achieved its purpose of fostering human connection, kind of thing, right? While at the opposite end of the game I wrote is all about we're going to be performing sex acts and then jumping into the narrative and not talking about the sex acts we just performed because we are playing two closeted frat boys who keep doing this. And so, like, there's a lot of interesting space to explore for artists interested in this kind of work of like sex and gaming or other interactive artwork. So
I love that.
And to quickly go back to what you said about how every single time that we create a new form of media, we share porn on it. VR headsets have become really popular recently in gaming, and like not a minute after they became popular, somebody made a porn game for VR. And so, and that there are a lot of people now crafting sort of sexual experiences in virtual reality, and I think that is a such an interesting and promising grounds for lots of different kinds of kink experiences.
I can confirm 15 minutes into having my VR headset, I definitely watched VR porn. And it was more like a science experiment because I'm like in my living room.
Sure.
But I was like, oh, I gotta do it. It's like a rite of passage when you get a VR headset. My partner did it when he got his first VR headset, and it was just like, oh shit, like this is a new experience for something that really, to me at least, hasn't changed in a very long time. Um, but it's just so interesting that yeah, the second we get new tech, well, porn's gonna be shared. Smut's gonna be shared. And all I can think about, unfortunately, is I think it was an anime convention or Comic Con convention where they had a booth and they said they curtained it off, where people, mostly men, were putting on a VR headset and then they had a blow up torso. Like it's like the legs and the arms are cut off, had boobs, and we're like the fucking dry humping this blow up doll at the convention, and then that's when VR headsets got so popular at that time. So it was like the immediate transition into sexual activity with the VR headset, which I can't wait for it to get better. But especially for women.
And now you'll be I was just gonna say you could probably it'll eventually be where you'll be able to sync your vibrator to your VR headset or your toys or whatever, and it'll be a wraparound or internal experience.
Contraption, some sort of contraption to make it work.
I think it's so funny, right? And I wrote an essay about this for Eurogamer last year. It's called Towards More Speculative Sex, right? Where we just talked about this idea that every time humans make a new invention, we think about how it can be used sexually. But in science fiction, we never see anything like we rarely see science fiction media depict the future of human sex, right? We see science fiction media depict the future of human everything except for sex. In fact, I talk about it in the article. When we conceive of aliens in science fiction movies, all of them look like live young women who we can have sex with, right? And I'm like, well, not everyone wants to have sex with live young women. And like, it boggles the mind that science fiction as a genre tries to reimagine how technology and society works. And yet, such a tiny fraction of it grapples with what is the future of human sexuality, even though as a society we are obsessed with it. And every time we make new technology, we think about how can we use this for sex, right? And I talked about like we should, as science fiction creators, which I am one, we should be thinking about like how human intimacy, eroticism, and sexuality in the future can exist, or what are the possibilities for this kind of thing in another world. Because by imagining, we can move towards breaking free of our preconceptions and all that jazz. But yeah, read the
Yeah, I
article about
think
that. I won't go on about it.
the only series I've ever seen sort of dive into that very minimally was like Black Mirror. Was like where they're replaying the sex they've had. And that to me, at least in my head, it was like the very limited experience I've ever seen in science fiction go into that topic. And honestly, when you bring up the aliens, like that's not the alien that I want to have sex with, not the blue women with double D tits. Like, don't get me wrong, like yeah, sure, but that when I think of aliens,
I might play with her, but
I was like, when I think of aliens, especially aliens I want to have sex with, that's kind of boring. You're really limiting yourself. You're putting yourself in a box there, and I pray that we can get some better media and more creative minds that aren't afraid of delving into that and thinking really what is
Yeah.
the future of sexual human interaction and non-human sexual interaction.
And
Um,
I noted that games are actually better about this than other forms of media. Games, especially if you look in the indie world, like go on itch.io and look at LGBTQ, right? You'll find like weird, unusual, bizarre, sexy things in game, which are lovely and great, right? I feel that other media like film and like fiction and things like that have a little bit of catching up to do with indie horny game designers who are interested in depicting sexuality in interesting ways, right? And it's not always about like what you just said, Booty Bop. It's not always about, oh, I don't want to play this game because I don't want to have sex with giant slug monster, right? Or if you play Consenticle, Naomi Clark's board game, I don't want to have sex with tentacle monster. It's not always about, oh, I want to have sex with a tentacle monster. It's about what do we consider to be normative sex? What bodies do we allow to be sexual and normal? Because like a lot of disabled people talk about this idea that people think of their bodies as like weird or monstrous and things, and like we want to open up the conversation about who is allowed to be sexy, and not just disabled people. Like every person with a different kind of body has hang-ups about their own body, right? I have hang-ups about my body, right? And I have a fairly normative conception of what a body is, right? And I think just by opening these stories, like stories are vehicles for thought, right? So opening up these science fiction stories about blowing up this idea of what sex is helps us reconsider that in the real world. Sorry, I can talk about this a lot. I'll stop.
I will say the Western, at least from my experience, Western games need to catch up. Like indies are doing it really well. But when we go to like the Japanese games, the Japanese have been doing it with like Eroge games and some of them with different type of bodies and creatures and that entire freedom. And maybe it's a cultural thing that, that freedom of like having sex with a tentacle monster. I don't know. But we need to catch up. We need to catch up because that's please, we need to catch up. Because that's where my like sexual games I will it's almost always a Japanese game. And I even think of like BDSM, that's where it bleeds into video gaming. So when I'm thinking BDSM and gaming, I'm thinking Persona 5 with the character in the full latex red and the cat mask, or even an anime where you're having this master sort of dynamics and things like that. And it just we need to catch up. We need to do better. Because there's a market for it, and I'm tired of really, really super expensive games just because I'm horny. Like I want, please, it shouldn't be a specialized thing. But that's all I've been thinking about before the panel was when have I seen BDSM in gaming? It's almost
yeah,
always a
that's
Japanese
It's very rare. Yeah, I can think of like Lady Killer in a Bind is like the only thing that comes to mind, like easily, I'm sure. Or like Consensual Torture Simulator, but that's a very small game as well. But yeah, it's interesting. Like we think about like, Mass Effect and Dragon Age. A lot of people think about those as games where you can romance aliens or non-human things, but even those don't conceive of like sexuality in unusual, interesting ways. Like great, give them enough presents, then their liking meter fills up, and then they will sleep with you, right? And then it fades to black, and it's So I encourage I encourage speculative fiction creators in all art fields to include sex and kink into their thoughts of like a different world or future.
Because right now it's
Um,
other, it's fashion, or it's that dynamic, or there was even a phone game where anime boys pretended to text you, and one of the paths was the guy ties you up and you're trapped there with him forever. Is that the most accurate depiction of BDSM? Probably not, but it's kind of one of those, I'll take what I can get. Okay.
Rafi said in the chat, Bayonetta kinda, and I would argue Bayonetta very. Like, she is a great embodiment of a dom, and also like a dom woman. She I mean, aside from the constricting things with her hair and whatnot, like she is very much about like owning her sexuality and making sure that everybody else knows that they cannot treat her a certain way because she is sort of effortlessly sexual. And I'm also very excited for Bayonetta 3. Who knows what else she's going to do.
This is just Ben and Rafi attempting to guilt me and shame me into not finishing Bayonetta. Like, this is literally all that is. Like, because I'm not the greatest with video games. I love them, but I have a very short capacity for them. And so I have played it and I'm playing it, but it's very sporadic. And so they keep bringing it up this weekend. I keep saying that it's just my own feelings, but it's probably just my own feelings. But I really do think that they are just encouraging me to play it because it has all the things that I would want in a game.
There's a plot for sure.
Yes, for sure. So I want to I want to tremendously thank you so much for making this idea that has been in my head for so long a reality. I love and appreciate you all for being here and sharing your wisdom and your experience. And I want to give each of you an opportunity to tell folks where they can find you, and if you have any final thoughts. So please tell the folks where they can find you and engage with you and learn more from you. Whoever wants to start.
You can find me on Instagram, Liquid and Leather, and also ink_stained_skin on Instagram as well. I am taking the summer off because I need a break as an educator, but I do teach a lot of 101 classes on different kinks, DS dynamics, electroplay. I'm always doing something on the internet. You can see some of my fun pictures that Robert talks about, and the moments that you're like, oh, I get it, that bitch. So
Bury that. Bury that.
yes, but you can find me in those places.
So I am on the internet. I'm probably most active on Twitter. So you can find me at Sharung Biswas, which is my full name. It'll be easy to find. There are not that many people with that kind of name. And I want to give a quick shout out. Very soon, in like 10 minutes, I'm going to be running a game of Pass the Sugar Please at this festival, which we still have a few slots left. If you want to join, it is a game about BDSM and trying to communicate with your partner at a tea party where you are not allowed to talk about BDSM. It is very fun. It is by Cleo Yunsu Davis. It is part of the book, which I also encourage everyone to check out. It's called Honey and Hot Wax, an anthology of erotic art games. It is from Pelgrane Press, who made things like 13th Age, #Feminism. It's a book of tabletop and live action role playing games about sex and sexuality. And if you join the game, you're going to get a discount code for it. Ooh. And the last thing I want to plug is in fall, Cleo Yunsu Davis and I are the co-editors of an anthology called Strange Lust, Strange Loves, an anthology of erotic interactive fiction, which is bringing together award-winning science fiction fantasy writers to write choose your adventure style interactive fiction. Is going to be free for people to play and read, and that's going to be on the Strange Horizons website. Strange Horizons is a very well-known science fiction fantasy magazine, so do check that out. That will be available to our backers in summer for Kickstarter, but to the public for free coming fall. So keep an eye out for that, because like I said, we made it free because one of our ideas, we got funding to pay everyone a fair wage because that's what we artists should be uplifted, but we also wanted to make it free because we want people to be exposed to ideas of sex and sexuality so that the ideas spread in society and make us less averse to talking about them in healthy, positive ways. Honey of Hot Wax, Strange Loves, Strange Loves, at Sharang Biswas.
Immediately followed both of you. Hi, y'all. My name is Bodhi Bop. I am a variety streamer. You can find me on Twitch, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, mostly Twitter. I stay on Twitter, not gonna lie. At Bodhi Bop, so BOORIBAP. I am a Latinx non-binary storyteller. I do panels on mental health and sexuality and just being gay as hell. So please, if you want to reach out, please reach out. Always open to have these conversations, and just a big thank you to NYC Gamers, to Robert, to Rafi, and to all of you for allowing me to have this conversation.
I am a photographer and visual designer. You can find me primarily on Instagram at art_with_ghosts. I have something of an ongoing series exploring people's relationships to kink and how it affects their sort of personal and everyday lives. Put on hold due to the pandemic, but hopefully gonna keep going with it. So that's where I'll be.
Thank you all so much. Everybody go follow them. You can find me just about everywhere online at Papa Bear Podcast. I'm going to plug myself because I have, for the last 2 years, have been working on, or working up to, starting my own podcast to do this very thing over and over again, because I think that my experiences in New York City, my experiences through Folsom Street East, through AVP, through NYC Gamers, just when we talk to people and when we share our stories, it is an opportunity to open doors for people and really allows us to fuck up the narrative that we have been fed for so long. So
To
Ben and I
clear
will be
the narrative.
Yes. And so Ben and I will actually be live streaming this afternoon around 1 o'clock at Papa Bear Podcast on Twitch. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, all over the place. And we will have some episodes out soon. I'm literally forcing myself to do the thing so that it happens, because, person of color, imposter syndrome, all of the things that come up for folks when we're trying to create things. I'm stepping outside of my comfort zone, and I'm so excited to do it and feel very supported by everyone around me. So thank you so much. If you are not at Pride School Festival, please, 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 please register. Come join us. Have some fun. Gamers.nyc/PSF. And thank you so much for watching.
Thank you for moderating.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.